Good morning and welcome to Media Monitor. And we're coming to you live from our studios here in Auckland Park in Johannesburg. I'm Peter Ndoro, your host for the program this morning. And we'll be taking a look on the show on the interest that's been shown on about ANN7's channel on DSTV. And this reflects a need by South Africa's Broadcasting Authority to open up the airwaves for more media players in the news environment. We'll take a look at that. And also, it's the second and last day of the Democratic Alliance's Federal Congress, which is underway in Pretoria. We'll be analysing the coverage leading up to the gathering of the highest decision-making body of the country's biggest opposition party. And also our global view. In this section, our feature, this one gives us a more detailed and nuanced look at the reportage from SABC's wide network of foreign correspondents. This morning, we'll be hearing from what's been happening in London. But first, let's take a quick look at what some of our leading South African and continental newspapers have been leading with in their publications, starting with the Sunday Times, which leads with a story about how former President Jacob Zuma's loyalists in KwaZulu-Natal are said to be plotting a campaign to oust President Cyril Ramaphosa as party leader and split their votes in next year's elections. The City Press, well, they're also leading with a story about Jacob Zuma. The former statesman is reported to be planning a long drawn-out battle to fight corruption charges, a battle that will take place inside the courts as well as on the streets, apparently. Also in the Sunday Independent they're running with a story about how struggle stalwart Winnie Mandela's divorce from former President Nelson Mandela tore apart her family, some who are still loyal to the global icon. And the Sunday Tribune, well, that's carrying a story about how the eThekwini municipality has bowed to strong-arm tactics of the Umkhonto we Sizwe Military Veterans Association and awarded jobs to more than 80 people who claimed to have served the ANC's armed wing. And the Weekend Argus leads with the story about how the DA remained resolute against land expropriation without compensation, with its Federal Congress unanimously adopting a motion to protect Section 25 of the Constitution, which deals with land reform. So that's how your papers are leading with some of their top stories. And in fact, that kind of leads us into our next section, where an hour into the closing day of the Federal Congress of the Democratic Alliance, South Africa's main opposition party, held at Tshwane Event Centre in Pretoria. And typically the party has had much media attention as it elects a leadership to guide it into the next year's national elections. In the week leading up to the Federal Congress, some attention was paid to diversity issues in the party, particularly its Black caucus, and they're demanding more Black representation of the Democratic Alliance's top leadership structures. Well, to help us dissect, and what you've just been seeing there, live pictures from Tshwane, and just as we got on air at 9 o'clock, the polls closed, so quite soon we're going to be hearing if there's been a change of guard at the top echelons of the DA structure. But to help us dissect the coverage, we now cross to our Port Elizabeth studios, where we are joined by Professor Jolene Steyn-Kotze, who's a senior research specialist at Human Rights Research Council. A very good morning to you, Prof. Thanks very much for joining us, and thanks for waking up early on a Sunday morning. But a lot's been going on in the DA camp, and I just wonder what your thoughts have been in the coverage leading up to, rather, the Congress itself.
You know, it's quite an interesting dynamic, I think, that is playing out within this current elective conference of the Democratic Alliance. We've seen a lot of focus, of course, on the land issue. Which is not surprising, given that the DA as a liberal political party really cannot come forward and almost undermine the sanctity of private property. So I think that is why we saw this, commitment, so to speak, to really, really protect the sanctity of private property in South Africa moving forward. But I do think a more interesting dynamic, of course, is the diversity debate that has been happening and the inclusion of the diversity clause. And I think it's quite telling that when we analyze and we look at the Democratic Alliance, we still speak of, for example, a black caucus within the party. So that for me indicates that as the party is looking towards the 2019 general elections, but also to, with the election of its new leadership, that sticky label of being a white party, so to speak, doesn't seem to want to go away, even though the Democratic Alliance is one of the most multiracial parties in the country.
Why have they struggled to change that perception, do you think? Is it the media? Have we perhaps contributed to telling one story or presenting one story?
You know, it's difficult to say, to almost place the proverbial blame, so to speak, on, either the media or the political party or whichever way it goes. I think looking at the broader South African political environment, we do have to bear in mind that the convenience of race is really very much still an electoral tool. We've seen the EFF engaged in it. We have seen the ANC engaged in it. We have also seen the DA engaged in it as well. In some of their campaigns. I'm thinking most notably the 1999 campaign as well. So looking at how the label sticks, looking at towards those internal debates on diversity, there the focus shifts on the political party, where we heard debates on how do you define diversity, what about racial quotas, how will the party's diversity clause align itself with policies of affirmative action that is geared towards redressing the inequalities of the past. And I think those are some difficult conversations to have, but better have them now as opposed to going to an election very much uncertain on what your policy platforms will be around those issues.
All right, so, I'm just wondering now in terms of what next for the Democratic Alliance. For a long time, they've been accused of just being anti-ANC. Do you think that they've articulated their own agenda properly, and do you think that the media perhaps has reported it fairly, or do we just kind of follow the noise?
It is interesting that the DA is always seen as being, almost its opposition politics focus very much on, well, the ANC didn't do this, and this, and we will be able to do this, and this. I think looking at, what is next for the Democratic Alliance, the fact that Mmusi Maimane stood as unopposed as leader of the DA sends a very strong message. It would have been quite uncomfortable had there been another leadership candidate, because it would have demonstrated that the political party had not necessarily sufficient faith in his ability to increase the electoral slice moving towards the 2019 general election. I do think some of the policy issues the DA has clarified, for example, the land question, and that they want to protect the sanctity of private property in South Africa. But again, there are some other policies where other political parties will give, I think, the DA a good run for their money, and that is most notably around issues of diversity, affirmative action, and how one is going to create a more inclusive leadership to really mirror and reflect broader South African society.
All right, Prof, I'm going to get some more thoughts from you shortly, but in our studios here in Johannesburg, I'm also joined by Thabo Lishilo, who's the political and social editor of the online publication, The Conversation. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right, so you've heard the Prof, she's an analyst, she's an observer. You're in the trenches as a journalist, and I just wonder your thoughts about the coverage getting us to the Congress.
Look, I think the coverage has been okay, but I would not say it has been particularly great. In that, when you initially read the articles that were published, one would have thought that the issue is really about black people within the DA fighting white people within the DA. And Steenhuisen, and I think that's Steenhuisen, their view on the issues of diversity, saying the way it's been couched, presently doesn't really speak to liberal values, which emphasize individuality, and individual agency and individual liberty. They're talking of diversity with liberal, with liberal values. There's a thing. I think that things seems to take over much of the coverage, and there wasn't much in terms of nuances. I hope that will actually start to come up after today.
So after the elections today, if people like Solim Simanga come forward, is that going to be enough, having more black faces at the top?
Look, the DA needs to have more black faces at the top, and black faces that are seen to actually have to command, have control, you know, whose voices actually are seen to matter, for it to be taken as a party that actually represents everybody in South Africa. They do have a diversity challenge in terms of the leadership, and they have to present the kind of a package to the electorate that is seen as actually taking cognizance of the concerns of the majority black people, of the population, which is black. And when you do that, they're being accused of sounding ANC, you know, but the diversity challenge is a serious challenge. And how they handle it will be, I think, in my view, will actually show the making of their leadership.
All right, Prof, I'm going to give you the final word because we're running out of time, and I'm just wondering, what does Mmusi Maimane need to say in his final speech to set up the DA in what's going to be a really important year for them to set their story for the elections that are coming?
You know, I think what we will find in the final speech is really very, very much a very delicate balancing act. You know, picture somebody walking on a tightrope, where on the one hand he has to present the future of the DA, or the future DA under this, you know, whether it's a new leadership with the changing of the guard, or a new leadership with the same people in the same roles, as truly a party for all South Africans. And he will need to do that without necessarily alienating some of the DA's core supporters, which of course, as we know, are minority groups within the country. And if there are lessons to be learned from local government elections in Nelson Mandela Bay, in Tshwane, in the city of Johannesburg, is that the DA really, really does need each and every single one of its voters to come out, but at the same time it also needs to start making inroads into ANC strongholds, as well as contend with the EFF as a political contender in those ANC strongholds. And it's going to be interesting to see what the final word from Mmusi Maimane is going to be in terms of presenting the party as truly an inclusive home for all.
All right, Professor Jolene Steyn-Kotze, thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us. Tabule Shila is in studio with us, and we'll be chatting a little bit further in a few moments' time. But first, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, what's been happening on social media? We'll get to the bottom of that right now. Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor, and it's time now for us to take a sneak peek at the Sunday newspapers, particularly some of the stories that are inside, or perhaps get a bit more meaning to the stories that are going to confront you on the front pages. And Thabo Lishilo is with me still. Thabo, I guess, understandably, the whole week, the front pages have been the story of Winnie Mandela. And I just wonder, and this is one of the things that have kind of been visiting me this whole week, is that I thought I knew her, and this week my journey has taken me to a different place just because of the information that's come through.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of having a diversity in media, or having many more publications and outlets, and all of them competed to try to give you the best that they can. Yeah?
Okay.
And when it happens, then they're able, because they are competing, so they have to try to give give us different aspects that will make them stand out in order to attract our attention, to make us read their stuff. So the competition actually helps, and it brings out Winnie in total. You know, now we have a fuller picture of who this woman really was and what she has done, and what she really meant for the country and the world and for the continent.
All right, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but what headlines have grabbed your attention in the papers? Which one are you starting with?
For me, there are two things.
Sunday Times.
Sunday Times, angry Zuma rebels plan to go it alone, and the story in another version of it in City Press, Zuma goes to war. And then there's Winnie, but also in the Sunday Times on page 2, the story about the DA Congress. Those are the ones that really get my attention.
So let's talk about, I think City Press, Zuma goes to war is something that really grabbed your attention. Why is that? What is it telling us?
Just before President Zuma was got out as president of the ANC, some people were warning. I mean, there's a sociologist at the University of Witwatersrand, Roger Salford, who wrote for the conversation, saying Zuma is not like Thabo Mbeki. He will not go out quietly. He will want to take the country down with him, even if it comes to that. That's what he will do. So we're beginning to see signs of that emerging. And then Zuma goes to war. And in the Sunday Times, when they talk about the ANC in KZN, so there's a talk of ANC of KZN, as if it's a separate party from the ANC. Now that they intend to encourage the people to vote only for the ANC in KZN if they don't get their way, and vote for another party nationally in order to split the vote. And now one wonders, are these ANC people? You know, that's a very serious problem that actually faces the party.
But former President Zuma has the power to guide them to loyalty to the party.
It's not in his interest to guide them to loyalty in the party. It has always been shown Zuma's government for the past 9 years has always been about him and only him, and him and the patronage networks around him. Only him. I mean, he's fought tooth and nail not to go to jail. He doesn't want to go to jail, so he'll grab at straws not to go to jail. Now, this guy's gave him a semblance of support, that he has strong support, and he might actually be able to weather the storm. He'll drag the case as long as he has done, and then Zuma's died. But he's beginning to have problems. That the presidency has withdrawn from challenging the court ruling that he should bear the costs. The next few weeks are going to be very, very interesting indeed.
All right, I'm going to open this page up because you know, this woman's face is just iconic, and I'm just wondering, as an editor during the course of this week, there's been this challenge of how do we tell the story of this woman. At the beginning, some media houses were quite brave and not brave, perhaps foolish, I don't know, it depends which side of the stick you want to be, but we're almost painting her as a villain. Others went straight away with praising her. Mandela himself said, tell the whole story. I'm a complete person. And so social media was quick to guide those publications that were painting her in a negative way. But she's a complete person in a context at a certain time. She wasn't a saint, but she certainly was an icon and a heroine. How do editors grapple with telling this story?
So the beauty with this is that the majority of the editors in this country, especially for the English-speaking, English language newspapers, are black editors. A lot of them would have gone through the things that Winnie has gone through. A lot of them would have gone through the struggle, being victims of apartheid, and they know that Winnie is much more than Stompie Sipei. We all know what she stood for, and the courageous battle she fought, her being banished, but still remaining resilient and strong and leading the struggle. I mean, she kept the fires. The ANC has a lot to thank for this woman. At the time when the ANC really, a lot of talk in the country was of black consciousness around that moment. But a little later on, she really held the torch.
Right.
She was ANC.
And I think you'll probably hit the nail on the head, is that you've got the right kind of people sitting in the chairs as editors, and that's why this narrative has changed quite a bit this week. Thanks very much for your insights. But this is a story that I want to see what's been happening on social media as well, because Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, everybody's been on it. And Pabalo, you've been monitoring it, and I guess there's only really one story that's been front and center of the social media.
Indeed, it has been rest in peace Winnie Mandela under a lot of different hashtags. But I mean, the South African government sent out this tweet when they found out that she had just passed away. And what's very interesting, what I saw on social media, is that a lot of international media houses as well were talking about Winnie Mandela, and a lot of other African media houses as well. So it kind of gives you an idea of the global impact that she has had, and how she has touched the lives of not only South Africans, but people across the globe as well. So this is the tweet that was sent out by the South African government. And then we also had a tweet from R&B musician R. Kelly, and he was basically relating his experience, saying that he was in South Africa one time, he was invited to her home, and they had a very powerful conversation, and he was just basically thanking her for everything that she has done. And then we also have another tweet coming through from, like I said, African media, from Kenya Notes. And then we also have tweets coming through from media moguls like Kanye Lomo, basically saying, quoting some of her famous quotes, "There is no longer anything I can fear. There is nothing the apartheid government has not done to me. There isn't any pain I haven't known."
So globally and domestically, everybody's kind of been saying one thing. It hasn't always been great, though. Some people have not had great memories of her, but they seem to have been drowned out by the majority.
Indeed. So I think a lot of people are saying, okay, we understand that Winnie Mandela had her faults like any other political leader, like anyone else. However, can we respect the sacrifices that she has made for us to be here we are right now? Like, for example, we have a tweet that came through from a guy called Crystal Thurston, and he was saying that she's a struggle icon, she's a struggle hero, and anyone who says anything that contradicts that clearly did not know her very well.
All right, in this image that's just gone past, one of the things that you saw is that she always had this fashion sense, isn't it? And I see you're wearing this look as well. This was a big thing on Friday.
This was a big thing on Friday, and Peter, I think it's going to be a big thing even moving forward, because she hasn't been buried yet. So the whole campaign was about wearing a duke to commemorate her memory, and it was specifically focused towards women. However, we had other men like Atandwa Gani, who was saying he is in solidarity with his sisters. We still had it over where I am, R.I.P. Mama Winnie Mandela, and he posted his picture there. And funny enough, he also acted on Black Panther, so that's the. And then we also have a duke from another Twitter user saying that my duke tie-in skills are terrible, I know, but nonetheless the sentiment is there. He did it quite well. And then we also have another artist, Kabomo, who also put up, this was from his Instagram profile. So it will be very interesting to see how, as the week progresses and closer to her burial, whether this will still stand out or not.
Do you think social media has educated people a bit more about Winnie Mandela?
Indeed, indeed. I think even from my side as a journalist, I've learned a lot more about her. And it's just amazing to see how everything that comes through on social media is not just, the lifestyle, it's not just about the excitement, but it's also about making people aware and using it as an awareness platform, so that people can know that this is what Winnie Mandela stood for, and it's just been splashed all over social media. And a lot of people have access to social media nowadays, so it's a really, really positive platform.
All right, so Thabo, you're an online publication, the conversation, but social media very much a part of, feeds into the kinds of things that you print. Has social media helped and grown our image and understanding of Winnie Mandela?
Yes, it has. Let me tell you how we work. Because we get academics to write the analysis for us. And then we use social media to promote the analysis. You know, I mean, if it was not for social media, we would not be able to really get that much traction that we get from using social media. So we promote the stuff on social media. I am on Twitter. We promote it on Facebook as well. All other platforms available, and the stuff gets retweeted, and people go to the original article.
All right. So different ways of being able to tell this story and impacting and. So thank you so much, Babalo. Always great to have you and get a sense of what people are saying on social media, because that's their voice. We're going to carry on a little bit though. Some of the most iconic images of Nomzamo Winnie Mandela were taken by veteran photojournalist Peter Magubane. He told the SABC about how he met the Mandela family through their children who schooled in Swaziland.
They were brutalized by the police. But I told myself that I am not going to be stopped by anyone to visit Unomzamo Winnie Mandela and her family. My children and her children were at school together. Because she was a woman who was being brutalized by the police, I told myself that I am not going to sit back and watch the police brutalize this woman who has done absolutely nothing. She was a restricted person. I knew that that little chance that I have, I must really make use of it. You know, I must do my best, come out with my best of pictures, and not fail. She was banned. She was not allowed to see people. Even her family, she was supposed to get a permit to see her family. I went to Brentford, parked my car far away from her. I walked to the house. Zinzi, her daughter, was there. I went in and took pictures of her. I spent about 30 minutes. Then I went into Brentford town just to photograph the town. I think with her you had to put your fears aside. I said, I am not doing any criminality here. I am doing my profession. I know I'm not supposed to be here, but the little time that I have, I'll make use of it. And I really made good use of it.
The iconic Peter Magubane sharing his thoughts and what he remembers of Winnie Mandela. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, you'll have heard that ANN7 has been dislodged. Their channel is disappearing, and ICASA is wanting to open up the pay TV space. Why do they want to do this? Well, we'll find out after this. Stay with us.
Shervin Bryceby's SABC News, New York.
Paul Barber, SABC News, London.
Ntebo Mokobo, SABC Ufa go tswa mo Russia.
Neha Punya, SABC News, Saharanpur in Uttar Pradesh in India.
Other than that, I've enjoyed every single moment of it.
SABC News, Soweto, Johannesburg.
Meningitis is a potentially deadly disease that affects more than 1 million people worldwide each year.
Well, it's an infection of the lining of the brain and the spinal cord. And it's caused by a variety of bacteria.
And also, importantly, with fungal meningitis, there's no transmission from person to person.
In South Africa and elsewhere in the world, the ministries of health etc. have recognized this as an important disease to prevent. And vaccines have been introduced into immunization, routine immunization programs.
It's really important to prevent, and the best way to prevent is to have people know their HIV status, start antiretroviral treatment as soon as possible.
For all your health news, join Health Talk every Saturday from 9 to 10.
After a horrific accident, major questions were asked.
So step one, I asked myself, do I really want to die? And my answer to that was, I'm not sure. And then step two was, do I want my parents to bury me? And the answer to that was no.
Learning kept his brain in full action on how the brain works.
When I was in hospital, right, as I was saying, to catch up with my peers, I started to become obsessed with memory techniques and how the brain works and how we retain information.
Touching lives is his continuous mission.
I now work for a non-profit where we deal with access issues regarding kids with disabilities and persons with disability. We're busy working on beach access.
Being wheelchair-bound did not stop fun in his life.
I party in a wheelchair, I laugh in a wheelchair, I smile in a wheelchair.
For all your uplifting stories, catch Bupilong every Friday.
A very good morning to you. If you're just waking up, you're watching Media Monitor. You've missed out on quite a lot already, but we still have things to discuss. And after DSTV controversially decided to remove the former Gupta-owned African News Network, or ANN7, it opened the bidding and received over 25 expressions of interest on the channel that will become available. A decision on who will take over the channel is imminent later this month. Now, this interest has led to the view that South Africa's news environment is in need of opening up. Just this week, the country's broadcasting regulatory authority, the Independent Communications Authority, ICASA, confirmed that it will soon begin oral hearings on competition in the subscription TV market in South Africa. Well, we are now joined by ICASA councillor, Ms. Butlenyana Mukhele. Very good morning to you. Thank you very much for joining us and welcome to the programme.
Morning, Peter. Thanks for having me on the show.
All right, so tell us a little bit about ICASA's role in levelling the playing field, trying to, I suppose, make things a little bit more equal. Pay TV, that's your next target. Tell us about what you've seen that needs changing.
Okay, ICASA at its nature, actually when it regulates, it's with creating diversity and competition in mind. We are regulating the public interest, which essentially means that every regulatory decision that we make has to be in the public interest. And this time around, I think there's been issues that have been identified around lack of competition in the subscription broadcasting market. We ourselves have seen that even though we're licensed around 9 service providers, there's currently only 2 providers are active in the market, and we'd like to find out what the impediments to competition have been. Hence, we started an inquiry last year. The oral hearings that you spoke about earlier on are as a result of this inquiry.
Okay. ANN7, MultiChoice has given them notice, and they're saying we want bidders to come and offer their services for this spare channel, inverted commas. A, do they have the right to do that without consulting you? And what's your view on that situation?
I think maybe to take a step back, we need to really clarify, as ICASA says, that the relationship between ANN7 and MultiChoice is a contractual one. It's a business arrangement similar to any other channel that MultiChoice has on its bouquet. So the same principles that would apply to, for instance, getting BBC on the platform would apply for ANN7. It's a commercial decision that MultiChoice makes as to who goes on air. The role that ICASA plays is that of channel authorization. MultiChoice is our licensee, and as a result, every time they would have to add a channel, they would have to get authorization from ICASA. And the process is such that it's as compared to licensing, is that as agile and as easy as possible. In fact, in terms of Regulation 7, we should respond within 60 days. So when MultiChoice approached ICASA in February 2013, it was for the purpose of informing us that they're adding ANN7 on their bouquet. They provided us with their details, the names, the language, the coverage, whether the channel was packaged, and so forth. The only other consideration that we had to take into account is whether or not the content of ANN7 flouts the code of conduct of broadcasting. So that's where the role of ICASA ends. And also in terms of the regulation, MultiChoice is not really obliged to inform us of the before it takes a decision, obviously. But once it decides to replace ANN7 with another service provider, then they'll go through the same
Okay, so you will process. Then look again, scrutinize the replacement, whether their content, who they are, and does it fit your ideals. So talk to us a little bit about this competitive space. You're talking about things like splitting rights. Yeah. For example, SuperSport, if you want to watch English football, you can only watch it there. Yeah. And this is something that you're looking at changing.
Yes, but I just also think that as a procedural body, ICASA has to undertake certain processes before such decisions can be made. And what you're talking about was actually included in the discussion document that we published last year. And whether or not those pro-competitive measures that you've just mentioned, unbundling of sports broadcasting rights, there's also an issue of shortening exclusivity contracts. We've also hinted of the possibility of unbundling the transmission network of what is deemed to, by at that stage, would have been the dominant player. But as I've mentioned, we are procedural. So the procedure is that there needs to be an investigation. There needs to be an examination of what the market is like, what the state of the market is like. And then issues like what you've just mentioned, which is to unbundle sports broadcasting rights, we can follow. And only just to mention that it's standard practice internationally. Ofcom has done it in relation to Biscay B after the investigation in 2010. It's the same applies to the European Union. There's measures to limit sports broadcasting contract durations and the like. So it's not something that ICASA thumbsucked. It's something that we are looking to implement following due process, but also based on the research that's been done in the market.
So where does all of this play in when we start to see things like Netflix coming into play, online video demand services? I mean, the whole playing field is changing. So, what's the role that you're going to be playing? We're seeing YouTube channels and all sorts of things which are almost kind of out of your purview coming to the fore.
I think you rightly mentioned that there are new developments that are coming. You have a lot of content providers that are not necessarily in the content regulated space, but they do have an impact on the players that we are regulating, and I think those are considered in relation to that. We may not be able to regulate them, and we have taken a stance as the regulator to allow that market, that particular market to mature before we can even do anything. We've adopted a wait-and-see approach in as far as over-the-top services are concerned. But I also think that because of the constraints that we have in terms of broadband accessibility and the cost of data and the like, they're not going to take off as much as we would have anticipated. So at this point in time, what we've observed is that they don't constitute as much competition to warrant
some kind of regulation.
Some kind of regulation.
Okay.
But I think as a regulator, we are keeping our eyes on it, and that's how we're dealing with. In fact, in terms of the subscription,
we're running out of time, so I'm going to rush us a little bit. Thabo, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this debate.
I think for us, as media, as news media, and as journalists, what's important is what you mentioned about the public interest, and that it's very, very important to have a diversity of voices, media voices, especially now that the media has actually become a public platform for the exchange of ideas. And it's very, very important that we have a diversity of voices so that we are able also to cover all voices and to hold different stakeholders and power players accountable. Be the government, be the private sector. Someone will emphasize the private sector. They should be able to do that. Others will look at NGOs, and others will look maybe be the fourth estate and say, we look at what government does, hold government accountable. When all of them do their job and do it very well, cumulatively, it's very good for the country.
All right, okay. Much debate still to come, I'm sure, and discussion. Ms. Mokhele, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now, every week here on Media Monitor, we hear from one of our correspondents to look at the stories that captivated in their areas. And in this weekend's Global View, our London-based correspondent, Paul Barber, takes us through the talking points on the subcontinent there.
Yes, well, welcome to Chelsea in the heart of West London, and we're outside the oldest news kiosk in London, Haynes of Sloane Square. Now, news this week of Winnie Mandela's passing made news headlines across the world, and here in the UK it was no exception at all. London, of course, being the centre of the international fight against apartheid, with concerts and campaigns gaining worldwide attention. So this death of a South African icon has really been the end of an era for many campaigners here in the UK and around the world. But the tributes to Winnie Mandela have been somewhat mixed here in Britain. Long-time anti-apartheid activist and former UK government minister Lord Peter Hain tweeted on the news, "She suffered so much bringing up her two girls when Nelson Mandela was in prison. Beaten up, banned, banished to remote Bramford, harassed, imprisoned. Fearless, defiant in the face of apartheid. Remember that when correctly criticising her rogue later life." Peter Hain also wrote an opinion piece in The Guardian in which he credits her for sustaining and helping Nelson Mandela become the radical activist that he was. Lord Hain begins the article with a touching anecdote of how Winnie had greeted and kissed his sisters when they attended the Rivonia trial alongside his mother, to the disgust, it has to be said, of the white policeman. She was indomitably defiant, he writes. Well, the Financial Times ran an article by its African editor David Pilling in which Winnie was the fallen angel to Nelson Mandela's saint. However, it goes on to point out the harsh life she was forced to lead, fighting a racist white regime. However, some other newspapers take a rather less charitable approach to Winnie's death, with the conservative Daily Telegraph saying that Winnie Mandela held centre stage as political prima donna throughout the most turbulent era of South African history, switching roles with breathtaking panache from the heroine of the revolution to the comic queen of low farce and to the ugly sister of shady deals and dirty deeds. On the other side of the spectrum, though, The Guardian columnist Afua Hirsch writes that Winnie Mandela was a hero and that if she'd been white, and perhaps a man, there would be no debate about it. Well, that's a conclusion echoed by a new documentary about Winnie Mandela, which will no doubt be in great demand now. Winnie won British filmmaker Pascal Lamshy a prestigious award at the Sundance Film Festival last year for her documentary, which she says runs counter to the prevailing narrative of Winnie as a villain, something that she says was successfully created and sustained by the anti-apartheid regime. Well, on to some other stories that have been dominating UK news this week, and the spike in the murder rate and violent crime here in London have been grabbing headlines for days. Here in the Financial Times you'll see London grief, murder spate puzzles capital. And certainly getting a lot of coverage, the fact that the number of homicide investigations overtook New York's in the last couple of months. More than 50 people have died so far this year, many young men and mostly from black communities. Gun crime has been rising, but mostly we're seeing knife crime really surging. Well, I went up to Hackney in East London this week, which was the scene of a recent stabbing of an 18-year-old man whose family was originally from Nigeria. The local newspaper up in that part of London, the Hackney Gazette, reports that friends of the victim, Israel Ogunsola, have been continuing to bring flowers to the scene of his death. Also quoted is the mayor of Hackney, Phil Glanville, who wrote on Twitter that he actually saw and witnessed the response of dedicated emergency services to the fatal stabbing there. Complex causes of this recent rise in violence requiring ongoing multi-layered response. Well, the comments of one North London MP, David Lammy, have also been getting a lot of news coverage here. He's blaming the surge in violence on a rise in drugs, illegal drugs on the streets of London. He says it's the worst violence I've ever seen, and he's calling for unity from all parties to fight the epidemic of gang murders. He's also said cocaine is as easy to buy as ordering a pizza online. He's taken to Twitter calling on the Prime Minister Theresa May to come and visit Tottenham to meet bereaved families, and a lot of people are saying that these crimes aren't getting the national attention that they deserve and the political priorities that they need because most of the victims are black. David Lammy also tweeting, "Why is the life of my constituents worth less than others?" And finally, another story making big news here this week. Ivory. The UK is bringing in one of the toughest anti-ivory laws in the world, banning the sale of almost all types of ivory except museum pieces, and it's hoped this will provide a much-needed lifeline for Africa's elephants. And campaigners have really welcomed the move. On Twitter, the WWF NGO said that this is a positive step forward in the fight against the illegal wildlife trade. And the IFAW, meanwhile, calling this good news, saying that this will make a huge difference to saving elephants. Thank you to everyone who helped us get this far. And one former minister writing in her local paper, the Basingstoke Gazette, Maria Miller, praising the move as helping to stop a heartbreaking decline in Africa's elephant population. So some positive news to end the week when the media has been dominated more than usual by tragedy and mourning. Paul Barber, SABC News, London.
No. Yes. Yes.
Sports Live every Saturday and Sunday at 7:30 p.m.
Back. We're starting to wrap things up on this week's edition of Media Monitor, but not before we've had an opportunity with Thabulishile to speak a little bit about what we can expect in the media in the week ahead. And I guess Winnie Mandela will be headline news again.
Yeah, I expect for the whole week Winnie Mandela to remain a big story. And then the next big story is the DA conference. I mean, tomorrow we'll have reports about what actually happened. From there, we ought to have analysis to try to put these things into perspective, what has actually happened and what the implications it means for the DA, for Mmusi Maimane, and for politics in South Africa, and the prospects for 2019, you know. And another important story internationally is the trade war between China and the US. I mean, the US slaps $50 billion worth of tariffs on China. China retaliates. And Trump says he's looking at another 100 billion. But now things are skewed. It shows that China seems to be in a weaker position because it exports much more to the United States, about over 500 billion worth. And the United States, it imports about 130 billion US dollars worth. So the trade war, it's actually will hit them much more. But the reality
is America can't afford not to have those Chinese exports.
They can't.
And on top of that, China's sitting with huge American debt, and if they say we want our money, America can't pay out.
Yeah, with the bonds, yeah. So those ones, I mean, there will be big stories, and trying to put them into perspective.
Help our viewers.
Just try to understand them.
Who's on the right and who's in the wrong here?
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know, but I'll be showing my own prejudice. I'm not very wild about Donald Trump, because I don't think he should,
All right.
he should be there.
The Winnie story, we've had quite a lot already this week.
Yeah.
This past week that's just finished. What will we be telling in the week leading up to her funeral?
I think there's a lot which still has to be. I haven't seen reports about Winnie in, say, for example, in terms of culture, how she was depicted in movies. I mean, I've seen stories about the movies about Winnie, books about Winnie, what have been written. We need those as well, review of those books. And secondly, I haven't seen poems being written about Winnie.
Wow. So there's still quite a lot to
unpack.
There's still quite a lot. Yeah. Thabo, literally, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much indeed for helping us kind of explain some of the headlines that we're seeing and giving us your thoughts. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, you've been watching Media Monitor, and just to let you know that right here on the SABC News channel, in a short while we'll be going to St. Mary's Anglican Church in downtown Johannesburg, where former President Kgalema Motlanthe is going to be speaking at a special service there, and it's all to do with Mayor Winnie Mandela. From Media Monitor and the team, it's a very good morning to you. Take care.